Welcome to Obsessed with History. In a time of turmoil where revolutions ignited and empires crumbled, a mysterious man emerged. He was not born of royal blood, yet he etched his name into history with fire and steel. His intellect was his weapon, and his ambition was his fuel. He saw what others could not and turned chaos into opportunity. He was not yet a commander, and the world did not yet know his name. But one battle would change everything. There, amidst the smoke and fire, he took his first step toward greatness, beginning a journey that would plunge Europe into more than 2 decades of war. This is not just a story of war, but a story of a man who seized destiny and reshaped history. Enjoy the watch. On a stormy night in August 1769, the waves crashed violently against the shores of Corsica, as if bearing witness to a moment that would change history. In a modest stone house in the town of Ajaccio, Letizia Bonaparte writhed in pain, struggling to stifle her cries while the fierce winds howled outside. Her husband, Carlo Bonaparte, paced anxiously in front of the house, knowing that this night would be far from ordinary. Inside the dimly lit room, women gathered around Letizia, whispering with concern as her breath grew heavier. Suddenly, a sharp cry pierced the air, a cry unlike any other. Napoleon was born, a small child, yet his eyes held an intensity far beyond his years, as if he already knew he was destined for greatness. An elderly woman stepped closer, gazing at him intently before murmuring in awe, "This child will rule France." No one could have imagined that this newborn would one day lead armies, shake thrones, and redraw the map of Europe. But fate had already set its course, and this night was only the beginning. In the summer of 1793, the French Revolution was entering its 4th year, and France was on the verge of anarchy. In Paris, political extremists had seized control of the revolution. They guillotined the king and imposed a reign of terror that dealt summary justice to all suspected enemies of the revolution. Hoping to unify the new republic, France's leaders had declared war on the Habsburg Empire, but the conflict quickly widened, and soon France was facing the combined might of Europe's leading powers, determined to stamp out her dangerous political experiment. Meanwhile, whole regions of France had come out in open revolt, horrified by the new extremism of the revolution. In August, the Republic suffered a further potentially fatal blow when the city of Toulon joined the revolt. Toulon was France's largest and most important naval base in the south, home to 1/3 of the entire French Navy. But now rebels welcomed their old enemy, the British Royal Navy, into the port, led by Admiral Lord Hood aboard HMS Victory. It was an extraordinary coup. Without a shot being fired, the Allies had crippled French naval power in the Mediterranean and gained a vital toehold on the French coast. All French forces in the area were immediately diverted to face this new threat and lay siege to the rebel port. 19,000 troops in all. But since most French officers had been aristocrats who were now fleeing the revolution in large numbers, they were seriously short of professional leadership. Their commander, General Jean-François Carteau, was a loyal Republican, but a court painter by trade with no military training. To make matters worse, one of his few professional officers, his artillery commander, Colonel Don Martin, had been badly wounded on the approach to Toulon. Antoine Salicetti, a Corsican deputy of the National Convention in Paris, recommended as his replacement a fellow countryman, a 24-year-old artillery officer who was passing Toulon en route to the front, named Napoleon Bonaparte, or Bonaparte. Bonaparte was a professional soldier, but he'd seen almost no active service. Nevertheless, Salicetti was impressed by his manner, and most of all, by the fact that Bonaparte had just written a political pamphlet A short story about a young artillery officer who berates his fellow diners for their disloyalty to the Republic. General Carteau thought it wise to accept Deputy Salisetti's recommendation. The great port of Toulon was well defended by city walls and a dozen outlying forts and redoubts. They were held by 2,000 British soldiers and sailors, 6,000 Spanish troops, 6,000 Neapolitans, and 800 Sardinians. Artillery would be the key to overcoming these formidable defenses. But when Bonaparte was put in command of the artillery on the 16th of September, he found himself with few cannons, not enough trained gun crews, and a shortage of gunpowder and shot. With relentless energy and determination, Bonaparte transformed the situation, requisitioning unused guns, training infantrymen to operate them, setting up a new forge and workshop, and arranging transport from Marseille of 100,000 sandbags for constructing new batteries. Through hard work, he was ultimately able to build his force up to 64 officers and 1,500 men, manning 100 cannon, howitzers, and mortars. Within days, Bonaparte had established 2 new forward batteries with good revolutionary names, La Montagne and Sans-Culotte, which brought Toulon's inner harbor within range and forced Admiral Hood to move all his ships closer to the port. Bonaparte also came up with a plan, one that would allow the French to bypass most of Toulon's defenses and secure the rapid victory the Republic so desperately needed. Bonaparte argued that if Fort L'Aiglette could be captured, which overlooked the harbor, he could fill it with heavy guns and shell the British and Spanish fleet at anchor. Admiral Hood would be forced to abandon the port and take with him the Allied soldiers that Toulon relied on for its defense. General Carteau saw the merits of Bonaparte's plan, and on the 22nd of September, French forces attacked Montcaire. But to Bonaparte's exasperation, while he'd argued for an attack by 3,000 men, the indecisive Carteau committed only 400. Not only was the attack easily repulsed, but it also alerted the Allies to the danger. Within 48 hours, they had reinforced Montcaire with thousands more troops and built a new fort, bristling with 20 cannon. The position was now so strong that the French nicknamed it Little Gibraltar. Finally, in mid-November, an experienced professional soldier arrived to take command of the French forces, General Dugommier. He saw at once that Bonaparte's plan was the only way to take Toulon and gave it his full backing. Bonaparte, promoted to major, got to work, overseeing the construction of several more batteries in preparation for the decisive assault. One forward battery was so exposed to enemy fire that men refused to be sent there. So Bonaparte renamed it La Batterie des Hommes Sans Peur, the battery of men without fear. And suddenly there was no shortage of volunteers. It was an early display of Napoleon's genius for inspiring his soldiers, one that would serve him well in the years ahead. On the 30th of November, the Allied Land Forces commander, British General Charles O'Hara, tried to seize back the initiative, leading an assault on the new French batteries facing Fort Malbosquet. At first, the attack was successful. The batteries were overrun and the French guns were spiked. But a counterattack, with much greater numbers and led in person by General Dugommier and Major Bonaparte, drove back the Allies. General O'Hara himself was shot through the hand and captured. 12 years before, he had surrendered to George Washington at Yorktown during the American War of Independence. Now he got to surrender to Napoleon Bonaparte. In the early hours of the 18th of December, in howling wind and driving rain, the French launched a major assault on Fort Mulgrave. The wet conditions made muskets useless except as clubs or with bayonets. Bonaparte led the second wave in amid fierce hand-to-hand fighting. His horse was killed under him, and he was bayoneted in the thigh by a British sergeant, a wound that came within inches of ending his life and radically changing the course of history. Finally, the Allied garrison was overwhelmed and Mulgrave fell to the French. Fort Leguillet and Tour de la Balaka-Pierre were soon also in French hands. By the following afternoon, the French had 10 heavy guns in Leguillet, placing the Allied ships within range. Admiral Hood could not expose his valuable ships of the line to such a threat. He had no option but to order an immediate evacuation of the fleet and garrison from Toulon. Small Spanish and British teams raced to destroy all the French ships and naval stores that they couldn't take with them. But amid the chaos of their departure, 18 ships of the line were allowed to fall back into French hands. A badly missed opportunity. Many French citizens of Toulon were desperate to escape aboard the Allied ships, knowing that the Republicans would inflict terrible reprisals on the city. British and Spanish ships took as many as they could, about 14,000 in all, but scores were drowned amid chaotic and desperate scenes. Others were left to face the wrath of the revolution. Republican troops entered the city the next morning, and executions and firing squads began almost immediately. For the next 2 weeks, about 200 were executed every day. Allied propaganda later blamed Bonaparte for the atrocities, but there's no evidence he was directly involved. France's young republic was now fighting back on all fronts, and with the fall of Toulon, the Allies had lost a golden opportunity, a chance to stir up further revolt, deal a lasting blow to French naval power, and perhaps even overturn the revolution. But instead, the French Republic had weathered one of its greatest storms, in no small part thanks to the remarkable judgment, energy, and courage of a 24-year-old artillery officer, now promoted to brigadier general in recognition of his extraordinary service at Toulon. Napoleon Bonaparte had taken his first step on the path to greatness, and for Europe, 21 years of almost constant war awaited. But this was not the end. It was only the beginning. Toulon had fallen, and Napoleon's star had begun to rise, but his ambition knew no bounds. With every battle, he moved closer to glory, and with every victory, he forged new enemies. From the battlefields of Italy to the heart of Europe, the world was about to witness the rise of an emperor unlike any before. But as every rise reaches its peak, every empire must also face its fall. Stay tuned for the next chapter in the story of Napoleon Bonaparte, the man who changed history forever. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you'll know the moment the next episode is released. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.